It was a calm morning, with the sun just starting to peek over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow across the small town. The air was crisp, the kind of morning that made everything feel peaceful and quiet. But for one man, a simple morning walk had turned into an unexpected journey. Mark, a war veteran, had always been an early riser. His life had changed forever a few years ago after a traumatic injury during his service. Now, bound to a wheelchair, he lived his life with a quiet determination. He had learned to accept his new normal, finding ways to make the most of each day. But even in his quiet routine, Mark never stopped caring about the world around him, always doing what he could to help others. Today, like most days, Mark rolled himself through the familiar park path near his home. He was used to the sounds of birds chirping and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. The park was a peaceful place where he could reflect on his thoughts, away from the memories of war and the struggles of living with his injury. But on this morning, something was different. As Mark wheeled himself along the gravel path, a strange sound caught his attention. At first, it was faint, a low, almost inaudible sound. He stopped, the quiet of the morning amplifying the noise. He listened carefully. There it was again, a soft whimpering, barely audible, but filled with desperation. Mark's heart tightened. It wasn't the sound of a bird or the wind rustling through the trees. This was the sound of something, or someone, crying for help. Instinctively, Mark turned his chair to follow the sound. The path he was on wound through a dense section of the park, where the trees grew thick and the shadows stretched long across the ground. The whimpering grew louder, and Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he moved closer. His mind raced with possibilities. Was it a child? An injured animal? The thought of someone, or something, being in pain made his breath quicken. As he rolled along, the sound became clearer, and the closer he got, the more urgent it sounded. There was no doubt now. Someone was in trouble. The trees opened up into a small clearing, and that's when Mark saw it. There, lying on the ground in the middle of the clearing, was a German shepherd. The dog was chained to a post, and it was crying, its body trembling with fear, its tail tucked between its legs. The dog was skinny, and its fur looked matted and unkempt. Mark's heart dropped as he took in the sight. The dog's eyes were wide with terror, and it looked up at Mark with a mixture of fear and confusion. It had clearly been neglected, left in this desolate place for who knows how long. The chain around its neck was tight, its legs unable to move freely, keeping it trapped in its misery. Mark wheeled himself closer, unable to tear his eyes away from the sad sight. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to help, but he was frozen for a moment. His wheelchair was bulky, and his legs weren't strong enough to move him quickly or easily. Despite his own limitations, he couldn't just walk away. The dog needed help. He could see it in its eyes, in the way it whimpered in pain. The whimpering stopped for a moment, and the dog seemed to sense Mark's presence. It lifted its head slightly, and Mark could see the faintest glimmer of hope in its eyes. But that hope quickly turned to fear as the dog recoiled, pulling back against the chain, as if unsure whether Mark was a friend or foe. Mark hesitated for a moment, his heart heavy with the decision he knew he had to make. He could feel the weight of his injury pressing down on him, the same way it always did. But this was different. This wasn't about his injury. This was about something bigger. The dog needed him. There was no question about that. Slowly, Mark reached out, trying to calm the dog. He spoke softly, his voice gentle, as if to reassure the animal. "Hey there, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." His words were barely a whisper, but they seemed to reach the dog, who stopped trembling for a moment. Mark gently extended his hand, offering a sign of peace. The dog hesitated but then inched closer, sniffing his hand. Mark's heart swelled as the dog's fear seemed to lessen. The connection between them was instant, both of them understanding that they were no longer alone in the world. Mark's hand was shaking, but he didn't pull back. He knew what he had to do next, even though it wasn't going to be easy. This was just the beginning of a rescue that would change both of their lives forever. The moment hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what was to come. Would Mark be able to help the dog? Would the two of them, despite their struggles, find a way to overcome the odds together? As Mark reached for the chain, the dog's eyes locked with his, and the suspense of what would happen next seemed almost unbearable. The rescue was about to begin. Mark sat there in his wheelchair, staring at the trembling German shepherd, still chained to the post. His heart pounded in his chest as he considered the situation. The dog was in desperate need, and everything about its condition screamed that it had been abandoned, left to suffer in silence for far too long. Mark had witnessed hardship and pain in his life. He had seen the worst of humanity during his time in the military. But this was different. This was pure helplessness, something that struck a chord deep inside him. The sun was beginning to rise higher in the sky, and the light filtered through the trees, casting a soft glow on the clearing. It should have been a peaceful morning, but the sight of this dog's suffering disrupted that peace. Mark's thoughts raced, and his mind struggled to keep up with the rush of emotions. He had been through so much in his own life, and now, here he was, facing something that felt bigger than his own struggles. He could hear the dog's whimpering growing softer, as if it was losing the strength to cry out. Each sound echoed in Mark's heart, pulling at the deepest parts of his being. He thought back to his own injury, the way he had felt when everything changed. He had been left broken, a shell of the man he once was. He had been angry, lost, and unsure of how to move forward. But somehow, through the dark moments, he had found his strength again. His body may have been broken, but his spirit remained unyielding. And now, he knew that the dog in front of him needed that same kind of strength. This dog had been abandoned and trapped in its own pain for far too long. Mark couldn't, he wouldn't, turn his back on it. Mark's eyes never left the dog. It had stopped pulling at the chain, but the fear in its eyes remained. He could see the confusion, the uncertainty. It wasn't sure who he was, and it wasn't sure if it could trust him. Mark understood that. Trust had been something he had lost too. After the accident that left him paralyzed, people around him had started to treat him differently, like he was fragile. They looked at him with pity, but he didn't want pity. He wanted respect, dignity, and to prove to himself that he was still capable of helping others. The dog's eyes shifted to the chain, and Mark saw the tension in its muscles. It was a prisoner, held by nothing more than a rusty piece of metal. Mark's gaze followed the chain to the post, then back to the dog. It was so simple, so cruel. The dog didn't deserve to be trapped like this. He couldn't sit there any longer and just do nothing. He looked around, taking in his surroundings. The park was quiet, almost eerily still, with no one around to help. He realized that it was up to him. No one else was coming. The idea of trying to free the dog was daunting. He wasn't strong like he used to be. His wheelchair restricted his movements, and his legs were useless. But none of that mattered now. The only thing that mattered was this dog, its suffering, and the fact that someone needed to act. Mark took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. The decision was made. Slowly, he began to push himself forward, maneuvering his wheelchair toward the dog. He was careful not to make any sudden movements that might startle the animal. He spoke softly, trying to soothe the dog. "It's okay, buddy. I'm here to help you. You're not alone anymore." The dog's eyes flickered, and for a moment, Mark saw something shift. The animal's fear was still present, but it seemed to recognize the sincerity in his voice. Mark wheeled closer, closer to the chain. His hand shook as he reached out, feeling the cold, rusty links. He tried to assess the situation, how to get the dog free without causing it more distress. The chain was tight around the dog's neck, and it looked like it had been there for too long. The links were corroded, and the post was old, but the dog's suffering was clear. Mark didn't hesitate. He wasn't sure how, but he knew that this was his moment. He reached into his bag and grabbed the small multi-tool he carried with him. It wasn't much, but it was something. With determination, he began to work at the chain, each turn of the tool slow and deliberate. His hands, though unsteady, worked with purpose. The dog whined softly, its eyes watching Mark, unsure of what would happen next. But Mark didn't look away. His focus was on the task, on the dog, and on the promise he had made to help. Minutes passed, and Mark felt the weight of his effort. His arms burned, and his body ached, but he didn't stop. The dog needed him, and he wasn't going to quit. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the chain came loose. The dog was free. Mark exhaled in relief, his body still trembling from the exertion. The dog, now released from its prison, stood there for a moment, uncertain. But then, something changed. The dog took a tentative step forward, then another. Mark extended his hand, and the dog sniffed it cautiously. And in that moment, the trust was born. The dog moved closer to Mark, its tail beginning to wag just a little. The bond between man and animal had been forged in that quiet, emotional moment. Mark smiled, a tired but genuine smile. He had made the decision to act, and in doing so, he had saved a life. But what happened next would be even more incredible. Mark's heart raced as he watched the dog take those hesitant steps toward him. Despite the chain finally being removed, the animal's struggle wasn't over. It was clear from the way the dog moved that its journey to recovery wouldn't be an easy one. The poor creature was weak, its legs shaky, and the way it kept stumbling made Mark's heart ache. His own body, though strong in spirit, was tired from the effort it took to free the dog. But he couldn't afford to rest. The rescue wasn't finished yet. The dog, though now free of the chain, still seemed uncertain, its legs giving out from time to time as it tried to stand. Mark, too, felt the weight of the situation. The park was empty, the air thick with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. He wasn't sure how far they had to go to get help for the dog, but he knew one thing: he couldn't leave the dog behind. Not after everything they had been through together in the last few minutes. "Come on, boy," Mark murmured gently, trying to encourage the dog as it wobbled on its feet. The dog's ears perked up at his voice, but it didn't have the strength to walk properly. Mark could see the exhaustion in its eyes. The dog was so weak that it was struggling just to take a few steps. Yet despite it all, there was something in the dog's expression that kept Mark moving forward. It wasn't giving up, and neither was he. Mark adjusted his position in the wheelchair, using the armrests for leverage. His prosthetic arm felt like it was growing heavier with each movement, but he couldn't stop now. He had made a commitment to the dog, and he wasn't about to break it. With a deep breath, he reached out, gently placing a hand on the dog's back, guiding it as they both moved toward the park exit. The journey was slow. The dog, unsure of its footing, stumbled and fell more than once, its paws scraping the dirt. Each time the dog fell, Mark felt a sharp pang of guilt. He couldn't imagine how difficult it must be for the dog to trust him. And yet, the animal kept trying. It was like they both shared the same struggle, pushing forward despite the odds, refusing to give up, no matter the pain. "Just a little further, buddy," Mark whispered, trying to reassure both the dog and himself. His arms were burning, and every inch of the path felt longer than the last. But Mark wasn't going to stop. The thought of leaving the dog alone in this condition was unbearable. The bond that had started with the simple act of freeing the dog had grown deeper with each step. As they neared the exit of the park, Mark noticed the dog's breathing becoming more labored. It was obvious that the animal hadn't eaten properly in days. Its ribs were showing through its fur, and it seemed to be struggling to keep up. Mark's heart sank as he saw the dog's energy dwindling, but he pressed on, willing his body to keep going even though every muscle in his arms screamed for rest. They reached the parking lot, and Mark's eyes scanned the area, desperate for help. He needed to get the dog to a place where it could be cared for. But with no one around, it was just him and the dog, struggling together. The weight of the situation felt unbearable at times. The dog, despite its efforts, was faltering. Mark gritted his teeth, refusing to let the dog down. He managed to maneuver his wheelchair close to the car, but the dog collapsed again. This time, Mark wasn't sure the dog could get up on its own. It whined softly, its eyes glazed with exhaustion. Mark cursed under his breath. This wasn't how he had imagined the rescue going. He had hoped for an easy solution, for the dog to stand tall and strong once freed. But reality was far different. The dog's body was too weak to stand for long, and Mark could feel his own body giving out as well. His legs, though numb, ached in a way he could never explain. But he couldn't give up. Not when the dog had come this far. Carefully, he reached down and gently lifted the dog, cradling it as best as he could. It was heavy, and Mark's arms trembled from the weight, but the dog was too exhausted to resist. He wheeled himself over to the side of the car, still supporting the dog as much as he could. The dog's breathing was shallow, but Mark could feel the warmth of its body against him. The animal was alive, barely, but alive. And Mark wasn't about to let it suffer any longer. With the last of his strength, Mark reached for his phone and dialed the number for animal control. He didn't know if the shelter was open or if help would come in time, but he knew that this was the best chance the dog had. The phone rang once, then twice, before someone picked up. Mark could barely speak, his voice thick with emotion as he explained the situation. The dispatcher promised that someone would be there soon, but Mark didn't wait around. He needed to keep the dog awake, to keep it fighting. "Stay with me, buddy," he murmured, stroking the dog's fur as best as he could. Despite the pain in his body, Mark refused to stop. They had made it this far together, and somehow they would make it the rest of the way. Mark sat there, his wheelchair parked by the side of the car, his arms trembling as he cradled the exhausted German shepherd in his lap. The dog's once weak breathing had become steadier, though it still labored with every inhale. Mark could feel the warmth of its body against him, its fur soft beneath his fingertips. For a moment, the world seemed to disappear. It was just him and the dog, two survivors connected by a bond that had been forged in the most unexpected of ways. The phone call to animal control had been made, but help hadn't arrived yet. Mark knew it would take time, but he refused to let the dog suffer. He kept whispering soft words of encouragement, trying to reassure the animal. "You're okay now, buddy. You're safe. Just a little longer, and we'll get you help." The dog's tired eyes met his, as if understanding the promise Mark had made. It was a silent exchange, one that didn't need words. It was the kind of understanding that only comes when two souls, broken in their own ways, come together to heal each other. Minutes passed like hours. Mark's back ached from the strain of holding the dog, but he didn't dare shift. The bond between them had solidified, and he knew that leaving the dog alone now, even for a moment, wasn't an option. He looked around, but the park was still empty. No one had come to offer assistance, and the quiet was almost suffocating. The sounds of the dog's labored breathing, Mark's own shallow breaths, and the distant rustling of leaves were the only noises in the air. It felt as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Just then, Mark saw a familiar car pulling into the parking lot. The animal control vehicle had arrived. Mark's heart leaped with relief, though he could hardly move. He was too tired, too drained from everything that had happened. His body was still struggling with the lingering effects of his own injury, and the pain was starting to settle in. But none of that mattered now. The dog needed help, and help had arrived. A woman in a blue uniform stepped out of the vehicle, her face full of compassion as she quickly approached Mark and the dog. Her eyes softened as she knelt down beside them. "You did a great job," she said softly, her voice full of admiration. Mark could barely muster a smile. His face felt heavy with exhaustion, but hearing those words meant more to him than he could express. She gently checked the dog's condition, her experienced hands moving with precision. She looked at Mark with a reassuring smile. "He's in rough shape, but he's going to be okay. We'll take him to the shelter, get him checked out by a vet, and get him the care he needs." Mark nodded, his chest swelling with relief. "Thank you. I didn't know what else to do." His voice faltered slightly, the weight of the situation finally catching up with him. The woman gave him a kind smile. "You did everything you could. You saved his life today." She carefully lifted the dog from Mark's lap and placed it gently into the back of the van. The dog, though still weak, wagged its tail slightly, as if acknowledging the kindness it had received. Mark watched, his eyes welling up with tears. He had never expected this moment. The moment when the dog would be safe, when it would no longer suffer. But now, it was happening. He had given the dog a chance at a new life, just as he had fought for his own chance to live. The woman turned back to Mark. "Do you want to come with us?" she asked, her voice gentle. Mark shook his head slowly, feeling the weight of his own limitations. "No, I think he'll be okay now. I've done what I can. I'll stay here. I'll wait to hear how he's doing." The woman nodded, understanding. "All right, we'll keep you updated. You're a hero today." As the van drove away, Mark remained in his spot, watching it disappear down the road. He didn't know how long he stayed there, but when he finally turned to leave, something in him had changed. The burden of the day, of the struggle, had lifted. He hadn't just helped an animal. He had helped himself. In saving the dog, he had found a piece of himself he thought he had lost forever. Mark wheeled himself back to his home, the weight of his prosthetic arm no longer as heavy as before. He couldn't stop thinking about the dog, now on its way to recovery, to safety, and for the first time in a long time, Mark felt a warmth spread through him, a quiet pride in the good he had done. He had proven to himself that even in the face of his own pain and struggles, he still had the capacity to help, to make a difference. The dog had found its second chance, and in some ways, so had Mark.